We're very lucky to have Fard with us today, and always a smart dresser. You look great, and I think that's it. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming today, Fard.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. As Alex and I are old friends, we go back quite a while, and I see some other folks in the room that are old friends as well. So just want to say thank you to everybody for attending this event, and thank you, Alex, for the opportunity to present today. What I'd like to do actually is kind of just give you a couple of markers to think about as I present these trends. The big thing that I think we're seeing in digital health overall is this idea of convergence, right? We're seeing convergence between industries. We're seeing convergence between technologies. You know, I thought was very interesting, the Health Codes folks with their patient engagement solution, just how that illustrated this issue, this idea of convergence. And so when I talk about these 5 digital innovation trends that will matter in 2018, it really is focusing on that idea and looking at how technology is impacting or being impacted by regulatory issues, socioeconomic issues, and those types of things, because I feel it's really important from an innovation perspective to look at those types of things. So what I'm going to be doing today is kind of talking first a little bit about the method that I use to identify these trends as well as analyze them, and then also talk about the trends themselves. So from a methodological perspective, this trend presentation and all the work that I do, both in my public speaking as well as my work with clients, is grounded in a methodology I developed called the Health Technology Ecosystem Analysis Methodology. And basically what it does is it really involves focusing systematically on 4 key areas that are important when you're looking at health technology ecosystems. And one of them is scope, right? How broad is this innovation? How does it impact different countries, different regions, disease states? The momentum behind the innovation, whether or not people are paying attention to it, whether it is rising and falling in attention, and those types of things. Connections are really important in digital. You know, which partners are coming together? How are innovations actually being combining, being mashed up, remixed, and those types of things. And then also investments, right? A lot of you here are from the investment community, and I'm not just talking about investments from the perspective of funding, but I'm also talking about infrastructure investments, right? We have folks all over the world and within governments and private sector at hospitals. They're all investing in these technologies as well, so it's important to look at it from that perspective. And so by focusing systematically on those 4 areas, it really does help to anchor any analysis and these key technological, social, and political factors shaping how these innovations are having an impact, whether or not they rise or fall, and those types of things. So one of the things to think about, you know, in the terms of this particular presentation, is a lot of trend conversations you hear really focus on technology, right? AI is hot. Yes, we know that. Hearables are coming. Wearables are here. Invisibles, those types of things. What I like to do is focus on the convergence between those various technology areas and then help people to understand what it means for the business, what it means for products and services, markets, those types of things. So how are these 2018 innovation trends identified? Well, one of them is through a data set that basically I built called DigiHealth Informer. And basically this is a platform that has that provides access to 4 million plus data points on digital health, right, around the world in terms of investments, partnerships, all those types of things. And the second is ongoing global market analysis that I conduct on behalf of clients, as well as work that I release publicly. And so that's basically how these innovation trends were identified, and that gives you a sense of kind of the methodology behind that. So let's actually get into the trends. What do these trends actually look like? What are they? So basically, I'd like you to focus on 5 things from a 2018 perspective. And so each of these icons, and you'll see these again, kind of focus on a different area of the innovation ecosystem or landscape that I think are going to be really interesting to watch in 2018. The first is this idea that policies and regulations both have the ability to accelerate innovation as well as blunt it, and I'll talk about why that is the case. Patient-generated data is really coming of age. Patient-generated data, as many of you know, has kind of had a bad reputation over the years from a tracking perspective and data quality and those types of things. So one of the things that's happening for patient-generated data is that that is improving in terms of its collection as well as analysis. Really, one of the things I think, and this is very clear from the presentations we saw this morning, mobile health is healthcare. In so many parts of the world, mobile is central. I'll talk about why that is the case as well. Blockchain, this is a hot area right now. Blockchain is something that people are actively looking at, and one of the things we're going to see in 2018 is the fact that this blockchain health ecosystem is diversifying in a range of ways, and I'll talk about that. And then finally, this is a concept that I actually introduced in a co-authored book I put together called ePatient 2015. It was released in 2013, and one of the things we talked about was this idea of empathetic interfaces. And so what we're seeing now, especially in 2018, really accelerate is this idea of these empathetic interfaces actually maturing. So let's first talk about policy, right? So when I look at policy, I'll talk about it from the US as well as the EU perspective, but one of the things that we've seen, especially with the new administration, is that the US Food and Drug Administration is really pushing to speed digital health innovation in a range of ways by taking a kind of light touch approach and categorizing innovations in a range of different ways. But there is some uncertainty that's going to be persisting around a couple of things. The first is net neutrality, which I'm sure you've all heard about with regard to what the FCC is focusing on, as well as in the EU, there's something called the General Data Protection Regulations, which even though this is something that's focused on in the EU, it has an impact on any one of you that have any data that is with an EU citizen. So let's talk about this policy and regulation. So this is actually an image, and you'll see a number of data points from the DigiHealth Informer platform. This is called an innovation map. Basically what it allows you to do is to basically see connections between organizations and innovations. And so for those of you in the back, I'll just kind of talk about the fact that what this shows is from an FDA innovation perspective, there's a digital health action plan, there's recent approvals and those types of things, really showing that there's a favorable regulatory environment for digital health here in the United States, and people really are looking toward that certainty to really accelerate their efforts and really understand when are things regulated and when they're not. So from an FDA perspective, innovation perspective, things look really great for digital health. Where things are a little bit less certain have to do with these general data protection regulation legislation that's coming out of the EU. And one of the big misnomers that people have is, well, if I'm here in the United States, this doesn't really matter to me, right? And the answer to that question is no. If you have any data that touches an EU citizen, you have to follow these particular regulations. And so one of the things that people in the EU are concerned about, and this is also having an impact on whether or not US companies want to actually go into the EU, is the fact that the member states actually have the ability to build on these regulations as well as develop different regimes from an enforcement perspective. So what you could have across Europe are these little micro-regulatory regimes where you basically have to follow different rules depending on where you're actually located. And so in the US, obviously, this is almost like, you know, if you go to Nevada versus New York, from a regulatory perspective, having to deal with completely different universes. So this could have a big impact on global digital health innovation from the perspective of building pan-European types of technologies and those types of things. So if you're thinking about the EU or have anything that touches an EU citizen, from a data perspective, you really need to be paying attention to this. So this is certainly something that's going to raise some uncertainty. The other thing from a net neutrality perspective that people are concerned about, and this is unsure as to whether or not this is actually going to happen, but people are concerned about these issues related to remote patient monitoring. They really do rely on these high-speed internet connections. Will the rural and socioeconomic disparities that we're already seeing in terms of internet access, access to telemedicine, telehealth, those types of things actually change and be constricted if actually the telehealth services actually become more expensive? This is actually a specific area where the FCC says otherwise in terms of repealing net neutrality. Another issue is the small hospitals, right? They don't have the same amount of money to actually access higher level broadband tiers. Will they suffer? And then this is a really big deal for health organizations. Large health organizations have these tremendous data lakes that they're using to access all the data from EHRs. And so if ISPs increase the cost of actually accessing this data, in addition to storing it, will that cause some issues with regard to data access and those types of things? So, you know, net neutrality is something that is really, I think, people are very uncertain about, and it could have some impacts on the fundamental things that people are doing from a digital health perspective. One of the things that I forgot to mention, my email address is on the bottom of each slide. So if you're interested in getting the slides or have any questions, because we won't have time to do that today, please feel free to email me and I'll be happy to get back to you. Next thing I want to talk about is patient-generated data. So back in the kind of bad old days when we were talking about quantified self and inputting all kinds of patient-related data, the big question was, is patient-related data actually going to be useful for folks? And so one of the things that's happened over the past few years is that you've got these passive biometric and digital tracking technologies, improved analytics tools, and these other innovations are actually transforming patient-generated data from kind of a stepchild to a really high-value resource. So this is an analysis that I conducted. This is actually based on another chart that comes out of DigiHealth Informer, basically looking at what are the innovations that are being referenced in articles focusing specifically on patient-generated data. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but as you can see, patient-generated data from an analytics perspective, being collected by mobile, by wearables, artificial intelligence, smartphones, those types of things. These are all data, patient-generated data collection and analytics tools that are maturing, and people are really focusing quite a bit on these. So from a scope perspective, these are really central to the collection of patient-generated data as well as its use. The other thing that I always like to look at is where are patient-generated data actually playing a role from a therapeutic perspective. And so this is a chart, again, from the platform that kind of gives you a sense of which diseases are referenced in these articles related to patient-generated data. And I just want to point out two of these, bipolar disorder and depression. And so in some of the work that I've done with some folks in this area, they're really interested in looking at patient-generated signals in terms of looking at compliance with medications, looking at relapse potential in bipolar. So this is a real area where patient-generated data, especially passive content, is really playing a role. So mobile health, I'm not going to say a lot about mobile health. I think this is really self-evident to everyone. The key thing I just want to emphasize here is it really is a default technology, right? So any application you look at, patient engagement, compliance, clinical trials, yes, there are some questions about the number of applications that are actually available, but when you look at it from a technology stack perspective, mobile is really central. It's almost become kind of the central operating system for digital health. And so efforts to improve the vetting and review of mobile applications really are going to drive the centrality of mobile health quite significantly. What I wanted to do here was just quickly show some data from the platform, just showing across different areas. We've got diabetes prevention, mental health treatment, as well as medication adherence and compliance. And each one of these cases, I've highlighted it in yellow. You see how mobile is coming to the top of the list when you look at the types of innovations that are being deployed in these areas. So I think anybody in the room understands this, but really, the keystone for 2018 to remember is that mobile health equals healthcare. From a blockchain perspective, there really is an emerging blockchain healthcare ecosystem. This is going to be a topic of conversation throughout the conference. What I want to talk about from a blockchain perspective is actually what is it? What is blockchain, right? And so basically it is a distributed and highly immutable, basically write once and read only, record of digital events. And the key thing that is important for you to understand about blockchain is the data integrity piece, right? The fact that you can know where the data is coming from, it can be shared widely, and that people are actually building applications on top of the blockchain ecosystem. So this has to do with why blockchain, and this is another innovation map from the platform, is enriching everything from mobile health to electronic medical records. And you see in this diagram some of the major recent events that have actually occurred in the blockchain health ecosystem. The key thing I want to kind of get you to really think about from a blockchain perspective in terms of innovation areas to watch in 2018, one of the issues with artificial intelligence that people are really going to be focusing on next year is data quality, right? If you get garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So one of the things that blockchain can do is actually regulate and have people have more confidence in the quality of the data. From a precision medicine perspective, it's a similar issue in terms of genomics, data quality, data protection, data sharing, all those types of things. So from a blockchain perspective, if you kind of want to get past the hype around blockchain and really look at some areas where it's going to have an impact, AI is a big one, right, in terms of garbage in, garbage out, and that actually being reduced from a blockchain perspective. The final trend that I want to talk about is one that I think is really interesting. How many of you know about Sophia, who's the first AI to be granted citizenship? So this is really interesting. In Saudi Arabia and at a conference, they actually granted this AI citizenship. It's actually a really great example of an empathetic interface. Basically, this is the idea that advances in AI, the Internet of Voice, so if any of you use the Alexa app or Siri, those are examples of the Internet of Voice. They're accelerating the development of these technologies that are really more responsive, empathetic, and human-like, which has benefits across a range of different areas. Here's an example of a simple empathetic interface. You see this kind of cute doll here. This is from Catalia Health, which just raised about $4 million in funding recently. And they have an app that delivers patient education, health provider data sharing, et cetera. But one of the interesting things that they found is by having this little doll here, this actually makes the people who are using the application much more responsive to it. And they actually, respond to it in a way that's really interesting from a human-machine interacting perspective. So this is just one example of an empathetic interface. But when you look at where these empathetic interfaces are playing a role, you see, in terms of the use of virtual assistants, you see it being used in addiction and cancer. You've also got chatbots being used in aging to reduce loneliness, as well as depression from a diagnosis and CBT perspective. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. And then from the robotics perspective, there's really a lot of interest in using these robots as home care companions for older adults, as well as even in stroke rehabilitation. So when you're kind of thinking about these empathetic interfaces and how they're evolving, these are some key disease areas that were in terms of areas of focus. So I'll just kind of review for you some things that I've discussed today. The first is, all of these trends are really great examples of convergence at work. When you look at any innovation area, you really have to pay a lot of attention to policy and regulatory issues and how they're going to actually impact your innovation. The focus on patient-generated data, as I've explained, some of those new innovations as well as advances are really having a big impact. Mobile health equals healthcare. Blockchain, I think we're moving past the hype a little bit into the more experimentation as well as implementation phase. And the really fun thing, I think, that could have a big impact is this idea of empathetic interfaces. So I won't have time to take questions, and I know I went through a lot of stuff. If you'd like to contact me, please, you can reach me during the event. I'll be here. And if you'd like the slides, please email me at the address below. I'll be happy to send them to you. So Alex, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you very much for your attention.
All right, big round of applause for Fard. Wow, that's fantastic, and just exactly what I expect from you, Fard. So thank you very much.